My name is Ramona, and I'm an integrative psychotherapist and somatic experiencing practitioner. And I'm truly glad to welcome you to this conversation about trauma. Angela Carr, who is a therapist, trainer, supervisor, and organizational consultant. She draws on a relational and developmental model of integration rooted in Gestalt, attachment, trauma, and object relation theories. Over the past 25 years, Angela has developed specialist expertise in substance use, occupational and organizational therapy, sexual violence, domestic abuse, and trauma-sensitive practice. Her work is grounded, compassionate, and deeply informed, and I'm honored to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you for the invite.
Welcome, and thank you for being here today. So today's conversation invites us into something that's both deeply human and profoundly clinical, the experience of trauma and what it asks of us as therapists, but also as people. Trauma is a word that we hear more and more these days, and yet for all its visibility, it often remains misunderstood. So this conversation is an invitation to explore what trauma really is, how it impacts us, and how we can meet it in therapy through a relational and adaptive lens. At the same time, this discussion also offers a glimpse into the upcoming training we're preparing in Bucharest, a trauma training designed for therapists and professionals who want to go deeper into trauma-informed practice. So let's begin by grounding this discussion in who you are, not just professionally, but personally. So I would ask you, how would you introduce yourself beyond your professional title, and what first drew you into psychotherapy and then more specifically to trauma work?
I went into working with supporting people purposefully. And I did that because I think that was my job. I was given unofficially growing up in the absence of parents, was to look after my two brothers and myself. And when I look back on my career history now, I'm just thinking Ramona gave a really good introduction. And I look back through domestic abuse and homelessness and all the different, and addiction and all the different areas of work that areas of life that I've lived. Unconsciously, I've ended up working in all of those areas. And it wasn't a chosen, I've got a plan. It was just, and I think what I did was I visited or revisited areas of my life where people were at and struggling. Maybe there was a bit of proflection in there with giving to other people what I wished somebody had been around to give to me. And then eventually what I found was I could only go so far in working with people relationally in those fields, mainly because it wasn't a therapeutic relationship as such. So then I decided to go and train to be a psychotherapist, and had to do a lot of therapy myself, which kind of knocked a lot of the rescuer out of me. Although there is still some of that physician heal thyself, isn't there? So yeah, I think I went into it out of my awareness, but intentionally.
Thank you, Angela. Was there a moment in your career that made it clear how essential a trauma-informed approach is?
I think for me, other than lived experience, when we started talking about this, what was really interesting for me was when we started to look at substances, relationships and attachment to substances as a kind of pseudo attachment figure, and then looked at it through the lens of trauma bonding. And I think that goes across lots of different fields I work in. It goes across domestic abuse, it goes across sexual violence, it goes across substance use. And I just think when people can become trauma bonded to substances, if they give short, welcome, pleasurable relief for a period of time, in the same way we can do to relationships. So I think that was interesting for me. In terms of trauma-informed, I just think it's such a difference. I've worked in different services, and I just think supervision is really important for people who work in these fields, because people might say to me, oh, I work relationally, but when you say, what does that mean? They don't fully understand. They don't know how to make use of self, and they get tied up in the interpersonal dynamics. Because I've worked with people who you can't expect people who are living in chaos to turn up at an appointment time that you give them that suits you, the same week, same time. And so, but what happens is people get punitive. Workers get punitive when they don't turn up on time. And and then start saying, well, you're out of treatment now, or come back in 2 weeks, we'll have to do a restart. And then I heard some other people who have had trauma-informed sensitivity training, who actually, if people don't turn up, phone up and say, where are you? I've missed you. And they know how to actually form relationships with people instead of getting into that punishing, punitive, you're wrong in your being in the world place. So, and I think, again, it goes back to when I've experienced people meeting me in that way, when I was acting out horrendously as in my teens, and when people actually met me with understanding and met me as a human being and saw beyond the acting out and the behavioral stuff, that's when I felt most met and most accepted. So knowing that experience is when I can actually touch that part in me and give that to other people as well. So I don't know if I answered the question. I think I've jumped around a bit, but so that's knowledge from a personal experience, professional experience, and supervising other people's experience.
How do you define trauma in your own work?
That I think developmental trauma obviously isn't in the DSM. And I remember being at the trauma summit where they were talking about they need to get it in, and they'd compiled loads of research, but DSM still weren't allowing developmental trauma in. And I think that's because if they really did, it would be a ground shift.
Yeah.
Because they would have to then redefine a lot of the personality adaptations, disorder categories to have to come under a heading of trauma. So that, yeah, I would put both in. I think I agree with you. It's not actually event, it's what happens internally and relationally as a result of initiating events. And I would also agree that that the developmental frame needs to most definitely be put on that as well. I know I definitely carried my parents' trauma alongside my own that was developed in relationship with them. But if I hadn't have gone into therapy and therapy training, it would still be getting passed down the line. And I think once somebody said once you were given a map and language, then actually that's really helped me. But that awareness in itself wouldn't have been enough. And that's that old Gestalt thing, isn't it? Awareness isn't a thing on its own. It's awareness for me in service of better contact first with myself. And then that enables me to have better contact with other people. That was the important thing, I think, that breaks that chain for me and my family anyway.
So widening a bit the lens, what do you think is missing in the public conversation about trauma, and maybe what are the most common misunderstandings about it?
That I would love for us to get to a place where there could be trauma-informed communities and training actually put in place for people in communities. Because if you think about it, we're quite well off to be able to go to therapy, really, aren't we? Yes, there's some therapy freely available, 6 sessions that you have to wait 18 months for. But other than that, who people go to are friends, families, kind of elders within the community. So actually, I think if we could deliver some training, I would also like to be involved in that, but if there was training for people in the community to understand trauma, understand how trauma works, understand their own trauma, and understand how to meet somebody from their own trauma, from that person's trauma response as well. That is where I'd love us to get to as a society. And there are, I remember doing a bit of research on this once, and there are some, although I wonder how much this is a badge ticking thing as well, but there are some cities aiming to become trauma-informed cities. So I was looking at some in America. I think there was 2. It was a couple of years ago. I'll have to go back to looking at it, but that was really interesting as well, as a concept. But I think what's missing for me sometimes is in the conversation is it's kept within the realms of therapy, and not everybody can access.
I would turn a bit the discussion to what this actually looks like in a therapy room, if you're okay with that. So, as therapists, how can we begin to recognize when trauma may be present in a client's story, even if it's not named directly? Or maybe what are the first signs that a client may be carrying it with him trauma?
Well, I'm like I said about body armor, in that
Mm.
We first learn to hold in by holding on, and it starts with breath before any kind of words.
Mm.
This fits perfectly with the transgenerational trauma, doesn't it? Because actually, when babies aren't born knowing how to regulate, they need a regulated other
Mm.
to regulate them. And how many parents have grown up with their own trauma who can't be self-regulating and therefore can't be a regulated other. It's interesting that I find myself saying these words, but what we know is that nervous systems speak to nervous systems without words. And I'm saying it's interesting for me to find myself saying that because this has been a long, long journey for me to really be able to attune into my own body and nervous system. Because for many, many, many years, it was almost like my body was just a vehicle to carry my head around in the world. So it's really interesting to hear Lydia say about, and again, we're coming from opposite ends of lived experience. It's what's communicated non-verbally. And for me, that was terrifying. Words and thinking were my safety. Words and thinking were what kept me okay. And the body wasn't. So to be able to tune into that and learn that about myself and then be able to use my nervous system to tune into other people's as well has been a hugely long journey for those reasons and really important in doing this work. I guess for me, one of the main indicators is shame. I can't remember who said this either, but somebody said, and I really like it, that shame's the contact at the shame's the mediator at the contact boundary. And I'm just thinking again about journey towards body for me is what I needed a lot of and that shame was all locked in my body, and what I needed a lot, the gestures were there. Interestingly, Ruella Frank's gestures were in my body. But I needed somebody to translate for me what those movements and were. I needed somebody to translate what the other way around. I needed them to translate what my body was doing and holding into words.
So I would like to explore more deeply through the lens of coping mechanisms, particularly those that were mentioned here, those that often carry shame, stigma, like addiction or emotional numbing. So I think if we view addiction as not a pathology, but as an emotional regulation strategy, how does that shift our therapeutic approach?
Repetition isn't something to be avoided because a repair without and repair. Because for me, I wouldn't trust that any relationship would be any different to original wounding ones if we didn't move beyond them because of a repeat. And I'm working with people where there's one of the keys for me around trauma is when I do find myself working really hard to not cause any repeats or ruptures or shame. Go, oh, okay, I know where I am now, and I've got a bit of I know what the territory is. I've been in using substances for a long time. Those moments of aliveness are bloody terrifying.
Yeah.
And to put somebody back into using again because that's terrifying. I was working with team the other day. Can't remember where these t-shirts came from. They were the InReach substance use team at the hospital, and the t-shirts they all had on were nice people do drugs too. And they were told to take them off. You can't have that message out there that nice people might want to do drugs. I'm just thinking about healthy and unhealthy messages here and healthy and unhealthy coping. It can't be a healthy choice for nice people. You have to be one of those villains, those rogues who, are really a bit fucked up and you're making really bad choices. So I'm just a bit careful around the language. And I'm just, I don't think they were careful around the language on the t-shirts because they got told they had to be removed. But I liked the message.
If you could offer just one message or one piece of wisdom drawn from your experience to a therapist who is just beginning their journey into trauma work, what would that be?
I'd go further even. I don't think it's ethical to sit with somebody and do this work if you haven't taken the challenge yourself and processed your own trauma out. No, it's not ethical in the first instance, but equally, I think what's unprocessed in ourselves will have blind spots too in clients. So I mean, that means you can be in therapy for the rest of your life, but but I think you need to have done some of your own work and process out some of your own trauma to be able to sit in a chair with somebody and do trauma work, if we're going to call it that. Yeah, and I think that's ethical. It's developmental. I could stick another 10 words on there, but my menopause brain won't let me find them. So that's my bit.
Until next time, maybe, may this be not the end of a conversation, but the beginning of many. So until then, may we listen deeply, may we stay curious, may we remember that maybe even a small act of attunement, maybe a look, can open the door to genuine change. And thank you so much.